So we've all been there. It's 3 in the morning, you're staring at the ceiling, and the intrusive thoughts just win. And for most of us, I think the loudest thought is usually financial. Specifically, do I have enough?
Followed very closely by, is everyone else doing better than me?
Exactly. It's that thought.
It's the universal anxiety loop, isn't it? We
Yeah.
treat retirement planning like this dark art where we're all just guessing.
And we assume our neighbors have it all figured out while we're just, scraping by.
Right.
We doom scroll those articles with the crazy headlines like, if you don't have $5 million by age 30, you're doomed.
Yeah, the clickbait.
But today I want to cut through all of that. We aren't going to rely on rules of thumb or just vibes. We are going to look at the actual hard data.
And we have an incredible stack of sources for this deep dive. We're combining the sentiment data, so what people feel from that 2025 Northwestern Mutual study,
Right,
with the hard transactional data from Empower and Fidelity.
And just to set the scale here for you, we aren't talking about a survey of 50 people at a mall.
No.
Empower has $1.8 trillion in assets. Fidelity has something like $16.4 trillion.
It's a massive, massive sample size.
We're looking into the actual bank accounts and 401ks of a huge chunk of the American population.
Which is why this data is so valuable. It strips away the polite fiction. People might lie on a survey. They might exaggerate their net worth to impress a pollster.
Sure.
But the ledger doesn't lie. The numbers in your 401k are, well, they are the numbers.
Exactly. And the story these numbers tell it's complicated. It's a story of massive disconnect between what we expect and what's actually happening.
A huge disconnect.
So let's start there with the expectation, the dream number. Northwestern Mutual asked Americans what they think they need to retire comfortably. What's the price tag on peace of mind in 2026?
The consensus number is $1.26 million.
Wow. 1.26.
That is the target the average American believes they need to hit to stop working.
It's a very specific, very confident sounding number. But is it based on, real math? Or is it based on fear?
Well, that's the critical question. The study shows that while people have anchored to this 1.26 million figure,
Yeah.
more than half of them expect to outlive their savings.
Oh, so the psychological baseline is, I need over $1 million and I probably won't get there.
You got it. And that creates this constant low-level background radiation of stress.
But we should probably contextualize that number before we, tear it apart. $1 million buys you a very different life in rural Ohio than it does in downtown Manhattan.
Precisely. Retirement is an inexact science because the variables are so personal. Your number is a function of your burn rate, your health, your location.
Or longevity, yeah.
Right. But, and this is key, while the need is subjective, the have is objective, we know exactly what people have saved.
Okay, so let's get into the reality. We're going to look at the savings benchmarks by age group using that Empower data. But before we drop the numbers, we have to talk about the elephant in the statistics room. The difference between average and median.
This is so important. This is where financial reporting usually fails people. If you just look at the average savings, you're going to feel terrible about yourself.
Because the average is so fragile, right?
Yeah.
It gets bullied by the outlier.
It gets completely skewed. In a data set this large, the ultra high net worth individuals, the top 1%, the top 0.1%, they drag that average way, way up.
So it creates a number that looks typical, but it isn't.
It isn't at all. So for this whole conversation, I want us and you to focus on the median. That's the middle number. 50% of people have more, 50% have less.
That's the true typical American experience.
Exactly.
Okay, let's look at the life cycle of a saver. I want to group these into phases, starting with what I'm calling the foundation years. So your 20s and 30s, this is where the habits get formed.
Right.
What does the median saver look like in their 20s?
In the 20s, the median retirement savings is roughly $36,800.
Okay, 36, almost 37,000. For someone just starting out, dealing with student loans, entry-level wages, that actually feels pretty solid.
It is. It shows intent. It shows you're in the game. But now look at the jump when we move to the 30s.
Okay.
The median savings climbs to roughly $91,000.
Whoa. That's nearly a 3x multiplier. That is a massive leap in a single decade.
It is, and it tells us something really important about career trajectories. The 30s are often called the messy middle of life, right?
Yeah, buying a house, kids, all of it.
Expenses are high, but despite that lifestyle inflation, the compounding effect of that early 36,000 combined with salary increases, it really starts to do the heavy lifting.
It's the first real proof of concept that the system works, if you just stay in it.
Mm.
But now we move into the accumulation phase, the 40s and 50s. This is where I suspect the gap between the average, that skewed number, and the median starts to get really, really wide.
This is exactly where the divergence happens. In your 40s, the average savings shoots up to about $545,000,
$500,000.
$500,000. But the median, the typical person,
Oh.
is sitting at about $213,000.
That is a stark difference. The average is more than double the median. This suggests that by your 40s, the high earners have really started to pull away from the pack.
Exactly. Income inequality compounds just like interest does. But let's look at the 50s. This is the pre-retirement decade, the red zone, so to speak.
Right.
The average balance here is nearly $970,000. It's knocking on the door of that $1 million milestone.
Which, again, paints a very rosy picture of the American saver. But what's the reality for the person right in the middle?
The median for the 50s is roughly $441,000.
So again, less than half of the average. And I want to pause on that number. $441,000. If you are 55 years old, you're looking at retirement in a decade. That number is tricky.
It is.
It's a lot of money, objectively. But is it quit your job forever money?
Well, it depends entirely on your liabilities, doesn't it? If you still have a mortgage, consumer debt, kids in college, 441K is going to feel very tight.
But if you're debt-free,
If you're debt-free, it's a robust bridge to Social Security. But it definitely signals that for the typical American, the idea of a luxurious retirement, constant travel might be off the table.
and that leads us to the moment of truth, the 60s. This is the transition from saving to spending. This is where we can directly compare that expectation we started with versus the reality.
This is the headline statistic of the whole deep dive, I think.
Yeah.
Remember, the dream number is 1.26 million.
Right.
The average savings for a 60-something is 1.15 million.
Which is incredibly close. I mean, if you just looked at the averages, you'd say problem solved. America has hit the target.
But you know it's coming. The median, the real person we were talking to, has $539,000.
And there it is. The anxiety explained in two numbers. The average American is basically living the dream. The typical American has less than half of what they think they need.
That $700,000 gap between the 1.26 million expectation and the 539,000 reality, that's where all the stress lives.
Yeah.
People look around, they see the averages in the headlines, and they feel like they are failing. But statistically, having $500,000 in your 60s puts you right in the middle of the pack. You are not behind. You are normal.
It's also worth noting the trend line after the 60s, right? The data shows a drawdown.
Of course. You're supposed to spend the money. The median drops to around 432 in the 70s and then 326 in the 80s. The nest egg is doing its job. It's supplementing income. It's not meant to grow forever.
Okay, I want to pivot here because the Empower data gives us the big picture totals, but the Fidelity data gives us the structure.
The anatomy of the savings.
Exactly. And when we look at the breakdown by generation, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, boomers, something fascinating happens with where the money is actually sitting.
This is a crucial layer. Fidelity breaks this down by account type. 401ks versus IRAs. And the shift in behavior as we age is just stark.
So let's start with the younger generations, Gen Z, millennials.
For them, their wealth is overwhelmingly concentrated in 401k. For millennials, the average 401k is about $67,000, while their IRA is only about $25,000.
Which makes perfect sense. They're in the workforce, they're accumulating, they're taking that employer match. It's autopilot savings.
It is. But now look at what happens when you get to the boomers. The ratio shifts dramatically.
How so?
For boomers, the average 401k is around $249,000, and the average IRA is about $257,000. It's almost a 50-50 split.
So the older you get, the more you rely on the IRA. Why does that migration happen?
Yeah, it's the great rollover. As people retire or change jobs late in their careers, they move that 401k money into IRAs. It's to get more control, more investment options, or just consolidate accounts.
But there's a risk there, isn't there? A 401k takes money out of your paycheck before you can even touch it. An IRA requires you to be a bit more hands-on.
There is a risk, but it also reflects a validation of the data we just saw. If you add those two boomer accounts together, the 249 and the 257,
You get just over $500,000,
$506,000 roughly.
which is shockingly close to the $539,000 median total we saw in the Empower data.
It confirms the pattern. For the median American, their financial existence is basically defined by these two accounts. That is the nest egg. There isn't some secret third bucket of gold.
Well, hold on. Is that entirely true? Because we've been very focused on financial assets, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. But the Fidelity report has a massive caveat attached to it. They explicitly say that assessing financial health based only on these accounts is an inexact science.
This is the blind spot. It's not leakage. The money isn't gone. It's just invisible to the institution holding the retirement account.
What do you mean?
Fidelity sees your IRA. They don't see your checking account at Chase. They don't see your CD at a local credit union.
And most importantly, they don't see your house.
That is the single biggest missing variable. Real estate. For the baby boomer generation specifically, home equity is often equal to or even greater than their retirement savings.
So let's go back to our median 60-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
They have $539,000 in their retirement accounts.
Yeah.
They feel behind the $1.26 million target.
Yeah.
But if they own a home worth, say, $500,000 and it's paid off,
Then their net worth is actually over $1 million. They are technically hitting the dream number.
they just can't bin the house at the grocery store.
That's the catch. You can be net worth rich, but cash flow poor.
Exactly. And that changes the nature of the crisis. It suggests that for many Americans, the problem isn't a lack of wealth. It's a lack of liquidity,
The money is locked in drywall and land, not in a checking account.
which explains why we see so much discussion about downsizing or reverse mortgages.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to unlock that invisible savings to fill the gap.
The gap between the $500K they have in cash and the $1.2 million they think they need. And we can't ignore the other invisible assets either.
Like what?
Health savings accounts, HSAs, have just exploded in popularity. That's tax advantage money specifically for healthcare, which is the #1 fear for retirees.
Good point. If you have 50 grand in an HSA, that's 50 grand of your 401k. You don't have to burn on medical bills.
It's a huge psychological buffer.
So when we zoom out and look at this entire picture, the Empower data, the Fidelity breakdown, the missing home equity, what's the verdict? Are we in a crisis or are we just, stressed?
I think we are suffering from a crisis of comparison. We are comparing our median reality to an average fantasy. The data shows that the typical American saver is actually being quite disciplined. Tripling your savings in your 30s, having over $500,000 in liquid assets by 60. These are not failures.
It seems like the goalpost, that $1.26 million number, might be the real problem. We've anchored ourselves to a number that assumes a very expensive lifestyle.
Without factoring in that our expenses might drop, our house might be paid off, and we might not need to replace 100% of our income.
That's the so what here.
Hmm.
If you were sitting there with $540,000, you were not destitute. You have options.
You do. But you might have to adjust the vision of retirement. Maybe it's not the yacht. Maybe it's the cabin.
Right. Run your own race. Don't look at the guy in the other lane because he might be an outlier skewing the data.
And he might have a huge mortgage you don't see.
Touché. The takeaway then is agency. You can't control the averages.
But you can control your savings rate and you can control your burn rate.
I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. We talked about this expectation gap of $700,000. That's the difference between what we have and what we want.
Right.
If we can't mathematically close that gap just by saving more, because, life is expensive, we have to close it by redefining what comfortable means.
That's a powerful idea.
Is the stress coming from the bank balance? Or is it coming from the definition of success that we've all been sold?
That's a question worth answering.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. Hopefully you're sleeping a little better tonight knowing where you actually stand.
Keep looking at the data.
We'll see you next time.